First speaker up today is Jim Leedy from the UC OP. He's the executive director of the UC Path Center, as opposed to UC Path, which is something that Jim's corrected me on a couple of times. So with that, please welcome Jim Leedy.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Jim. So take a seat. So as we get going, Jim, just give a brief background on who you are, your background in UC Path Center, and then we'll get going from there.
Okay. As Phil mentioned, I'm the executive director of the UC Path Center. I've been with the University of California about 3 years now, 3 years this month. My background, I spent 20 years of my career with Hewlett-Packard and ran shared service operations for them. I've also worked, most of my background is in high tech. I've worked for Red Hat, and prior to that I worked for 2 Fortune 500 companies in the Midwest. The UC Path Center is located in Riverside, California. We have a building of 150,000 square feet, and right now we have the top floor finished out, 50,000 square feet. When the operation is fully staffed, we'll house about 420 people there. We're hiring as we speak, and we're currently at about 80 headcount on our way to our first deployment this fall, this month.
So thank you, Jim. So explain a little bit of the background about how UC Path Center came about. What was the original driver for the project?
Okay. The project actually started with the controllers of the University of California across all the locations got together in 2009 and did a risk assessment on the systems that were in play. And one of the major systems that bubbled to the top of that analysis was the payroll system. The payroll system is 35 years old. There are 11 of those systems scattered across the university system. It's very, very difficult these days to find people to support those systems, and when they run the payrolls each and every month, it's hold your breath and wait and see to make sure that these systems run successfully. So the UC Path project came about initially as a risk mitigation strategy to replace the existing payroll systems.
Right.
Longer term, it then evolved into standardization of processes and also the formation of the Shared Service Center as a result of the Board of Regents issuing a proclamation for, they call it the Working Smarter Initiative.
Right.
That's basically said the University of California as a system needs to be more efficient and spend the taxpayers' dollars better and streamline operations and administrative cost.
So just to be clear, the scope for the center today is obviously payroll, but can you expand a little bit? Is it payroll and certain other HR services, and then, while you're just about in the phase of starting to go live, and we'll come back to that in a second, what is the anticipation of the future, or is that something that's to be decided?
So currently in our scope for the UC Path Center, we have, of course, payroll, we have benefit administration, and we have what PeopleSoft calls WFA, which is the human resources component. We also are providing a customer service feature, which has never been done before in the University of California for payroll and HR. So we have a call center with various means of getting in touch with the call center and reaching the correct answer and finding the information you need. Longer term, timekeeping will be one of our next big hurdles. There's currently over 30 different timekeeping systems across the University of California, and they have to be merged into hopefully a common one, perhaps two. And there are a lot of discussions underway regarding other shared service opportunities, be it procure to pay, general ledger, travel expense reporting, the billing function. There's several things that are bubbling up. No definite plans have been made yet.
So going back to, I think you said 2009 when it first started getting discussed. One thing you and I have talked a little bit about, Jim, is business cases for initiatives like this. Well, clearly the driver for the technology backbone was the driver. Was there a business case, or was it we just need to do it and get on with it? Give us a bit of background on how the original move was made.
Well, it's an interesting story there as well. I know there were companies that were brought in to do an analysis of headcount savings, which is typical of the shared service operation. When you centralize, what types of headcount savings are you going to realize? Everyone in the 15 locations across the UC system has a different opinion as to the accuracy and the authenticity of the numbers that were collected for those headcounts. We've also followed that up just recently, about 2 years ago, with another study trying to really get our arms around what is the most efficient headcount for the center, but we didn't go back to the locations. So at the end of the day, was there a business case? Yes, there's obviously a white paper that says here's your anticipated savings. But across the locations, unlike corporate America, where I used to work,
Yeah.
and someone says you're going to do shared services, you're going to save X number of people and these jobs go away, that's not necessarily the environment we have in higher education. So these folks that are involved in these processes typically do a part of this and a part of that for their job. And it's very difficult to get a one headcount savings, if you will, across the board. So it's been a little bit of a cat and mouse game, I guess I would say, trying to really prove what's the effective ROI and what's the true savings going to be when the center is fully staffed vis-a-vis location savings. We haven't got that number.
And the fact that it was 2009, I know you guys are making tremendous progress now, and if I understand, your first go live is at the end of November. And then you've got a rollout schedule, which we'll come back to shortly. But obviously 2009 to 2015 is quite a long time. I understand there was a couple of sort of checkpoints and revalidating assumptions, etc. Rather than going back over the history, you've done a lot, I know, over the last 12 to 18 months to really make sure this is going to work around standardization and process. And can you just briefly describe some of those things that have happened in the last 12 to 18 months to really show this had momentum into the first deployments?
So I'd like to go back, if I may, just for a minute to set the stage, because I don't want people to have the 6 years. The 2009 study actually concluded in late 2010. The initiative formed in 2011. And outside agency was hired, a consulting firm, to bring in the software and implement it. And unfortunately, that implementation was more of what we call a program slam, a package slam. There was no attention being paid to the business process. It was rather, let's just implement this software. It took the UC about a year to realize that that wasn't headed in the direction we wanted, so we stopped the project. We went out and talked to all of our locations and the constituents and did some interviews, and discovered quickly that business process reengineering is a big part of this, even though the particular consulting agency that we had didn't feel that way. So that put the project on hold. We got everyone together. This was in 2013, and we spent about 6 weeks locked up going through 100 different processes and achieving what we call standardization from the location to the center, and then from the center back to the location, setting expectations and agreeing upon what those processes were going to be and how they operate. So after that was done, then we had approximately 100 different changes that we had to go back and recode. So that's been a big portion of the delay. So since 2014, we've basically been in test mode, testing these changes during our full systems integrated testing. User acceptance testing was just the last 2 months, and then we're going live this month.
Now, you mentioned, Jim, and you're a guy, you know, I've talked quite a lot over the last couple of years, that you're from a private sector background. But that isn't a lesson learned per se just from a public sector. I've seen a lot of technology implementation start of just being technology and forgetting the business process side. So that's a real lesson learned here, would you say?
Yes, absolutely.
And then going forward, do you think that's a lesson that can be applied across the university? Because it's not just about the technology, right? So it's about the people, the process, and everything else. How has that been received? How have you structured the project, for example? You mentioned to me the other day about you've got different project teams focused on different areas. So how has that realization it's not just about technology manifested itself in the way you've run the project itself?
So within the project, we have location project teams. They're called PMOs, Project Management Offices. And those locations, as we speak, are going through their local design of those processes. So they understand what the end result is, and it's now how do we interact and work with the Path Center. So in many cases, the locations are now looking at either centralization of a mini, if you will, a shared service office on their campus. And if not that, the new term seems to be clustering. In the case of our larger institutions, moving away from a very decentralized model, kind of halfway moving into what we call a cluster model. And so that's going on. In addition, the locations are now starting to talk amongst themselves about should we do things the same way, which is unheard of 5 or 6 years ago when this initiative started. And as you talk about, for example, the new hire process, and is there a common application that we want to use? For example, within PeopleSoft, there's a module. Do you want to make that your standard? And if so, what are the impacts to that location? And how would your business processes need to change? So I think that's been a real benefit to us.
And absolutely. And in talking about the higher education and broader public sector in general, we talk about public sector to include things like higher education, federal, local government, and healthcare. So that's what I call by broader public sector. But one of the challenges, it's true in private sector too, but one of the challenges, especially I think in public sector, is the multiple stakeholder groups you have to engage with. the change management, to use that term, the interested parties, the opinions that you have to get engaged with. Now, I know, again, from talking to you early on, there was a lot of discussion and not necessarily decision-making, but you changed that structure, Jim. Could you explain how you changed the governance structure around this project and how it helped?
Yeah, so initially when I started at the UC, we had several committees, and the committees were very good about providing opinion and providing feedback. We would leave the room ultimately saying, great, we have a decision. And 3 weeks to a month later, we'd get an email. I've been thinking about said subject, and I've changed my mind. I'd like to discuss further. And this went on for well over a year, my first year at the UC. And then we came together, one of the governance teams that we had said, let's develop a charter. Let's go out on the right side, kind of on the far end. Let's write a charter, and let's put some rules in place and filter that through the UC system and see what happens. And so the first level of governance we have is what we call our steering committee. It's basically at the managerial level, campus HR representatives, information technology folks, controllership, et cetera. And we did a charter. The charter basically said, we're going to vote. We're going to vote at every meeting. And you can send 10 people if you would like as a location, but at the end of the day, you get one vote.
Right.
70% of the majority. And after that, if you're still not in agreement, you can write your dissenting opinion. We'll be happy to entertain that, but we're going to vote. And that was probably the biggest breakthrough. Once that was adopted, then the next level up, which was our what we call our executive council, vice chancellors and executive officers that report directly to the president of the system, people that run the budget, if you will, and set the strategy. We did the same thing with their charter. And so what we have today is the first level votes on it. If they can't reach a vote, it goes to the next level. And that level has 24 hours. Our president has said, you have 24 hours to vote on that. If you can't make a decision, it comes to me and I'll make the decision for you. So she's been very instrumental in basically putting that type of rigor into the system where decisions get made, and based on the fact that we voted, they stick.
And that's quite, revolution is a strong word, but in a university system across multiple campuses, that's quite revolutionary, isn't it, to have that sort of drive behind a project like this, because campuses in any university system are often, you know, their own powerhouses, and this is quite a change, right? So how's that been received?
I think it's been received very well, and I owe a lot of the credit, I think we owe a lot of the credit to President Napolitano. She came obviously from the federal sector. She's worked in shared services. She understands it. She did that, I believe, when she was governor of Arizona as well. And as a high-level official, the highest level official within the University of California system, she's been our #1 proponent. She's visited the center twice already. She has a great rapport with the people on the project team, and she said, we're going to do this. She is fully committed and behind that effort, which makes a huge ripple effect then down through the organization to all the various locations.
So one of the questions I had, which you've sort of answered there, Jim, is you've had executive leadership support, which is often fundamental in a transformation. You can evolve without necessarily having that so much, but in a transformation you really need that. Would you agree with that? Not just at Janet Napolitano, but other levels?
Yeah, and my boss as well. I report directly to the Chief Operating Officer, who reports to the President. And both she and our CFO are fully engaged in the project and have been very instrumental in making sure that people are on board and removing obstacles for us as we go on our journey.
So just to give a bit of color, you have, if I remember correctly, Jim, you have 4 phases to the go live. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Just and quickly, it's UCOP first, University of California Officer President in Oakland first. Can you just briefly describe the 4 phases and the logic behind those phases?
Yeah, so everything we do, we've started since I've been there. I've initiated the crawl, walk, and run strategy. So the crawl strategy for us is the University of California Office of the President, 2,000 employees, mostly staff, very vanilla, very basic, and that's our implementation this November. The walk strategy is our first deployment, will be UCLA, UC Merced, UC Riverside, and ASUCLA. And there we'll be approaching probably 55 to 60,000 employees coming in at one time. And that will bring into the center the support of the medical centers, the support of academia, large campus, decentralized model, et cetera. After that, then we have 2 remaining deployments of the remaining locations, and that's really the run strategy. Once you've mastered the walk and being able to handle the large volume, then it's a question of the hiring and the staffing of the team at the center and the deployment and rollout, ultimately, of our final 2 groupings.
I really like the way you described that crawl, walk, run. UCLA is a big campus though, right?
Yes.
And that's the second one. There was some logic for UCLA going second, is that right?
Yeah, we have those 11 systems that I mentioned earlier. UCLA has basically offered their services to some of the smaller campus. So the UCLA payroll system had within it the Office of the President, UC Merced, and UCLA. So we've had to pull out the Office of the President as part of this implementation, and we want to get UCLA on board so that we don't have to do an extract, if you will, for the University of California at Merced. We can bring those two in together, and then we can basically make that system dormant. So that's part of that strategy.
And then we've just got a couple more minutes left, Jim. Why Riverside? Why the location of Riverside? What drove that? You had some location analysis, I understand, but what drove that
this
location?
was all prior to me being hired, but as I understand it, there was an internal bidding process that went on. UC Davis and UC Riverside responded. I think at the end of the day, Riverside was chosen for two main reasons. Number one, there was the building that we were in was available commercially, had been available for 2 or 3 years, so the university got a great deal on the real estate. Number two, the cost of housing within the Inland Empire over in the San Bernardino, Ontario, Riverside area is more reasonable. And then, of course, either location, be it Davis or Riverside, the availability of talent with the UC campus right next door. Those were the driving factors.
And then just probably the last question. As you move forward, how are you guys going to, well, there's two parts to this last question. Firstly, how are you going to partly ensure that the campuses buy in? And you mentioned to me when we discussed this before that part of it is actually through the recharge mechanism. And then the second element to that is what sort of measurement processes are you going to put in place to measure your success? Again, you talked about developing that as you go forward, but that was really interesting. So if you could touch on those two, that's probably the last question.
Okay. So from a campus perspective, we do as much as we can, obviously, in meeting with our governance teams and getting to the campus and working with their issues. You know, we have 3 projects going concurrently as we speak. We have the Office of the President, we have the second group, and then we have all other deployments. And we're managing 3 separate projects in order to kind of minimize the amount of time for rollout. So through governance, through campus visits, we're trying to get as much as we can from those locations, maintain the momentum, and get their buy-in. On the metrics side, I have to chuckle. It's been very interesting. The minute we were hired at UC Path, we went out to the campuses and we asked for metrics. Well, how do things work today and what type of metrics do you have? It seems those metrics have disappeared. They're no longer being kept, or they're not as readily available as they used to be. So it's very difficult for us to form a baseline. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to start out, again, crawl, walk, and run. We're going to start out collecting volume metrics.
Right.
We're going to take those volume metrics in phase 2 and begin to look at our own internal performance, set what we see as a watermark for a service level agreement, share that with the campuses, go back and forth through that, incorporate that into our SPA, our service partnership agreement, and then ultimately we'll review those metrics with leadership and fine tune as we go. So we're really starting with a blank sheet of paper because we really don't have current state to where we can compare to what rates are today and metrics are today at the locations.
I'm just going to touch on one thing you said there. You said service partnership agreements, and that's something we've chatted about. This is a partnership, right? It's not being seen as a corporate-driven thing, although that perception might have been there originally, and it still might be there to some degree. This is a partnership, right, between the Path Center, UCOP, and the campuses. Is that how it's been
That's correct.
designed?
When I go on my campus visits, I basically, at the end of the visit, I'll tell them, you know, we're in this together. I cannot run a payroll without your time card file, and vice versa. You can't have checks produced without producing a time card file for us. Right. And there are many other things other than that, but the analogy of a bus driving down the street, and at every stop you're going to pick up a time card file, that seems to resonate with people, and that's what we use as our example when we go on location visits.
All right. Well, I think we're out of time now, so honestly, we could talk all day, Jim, and we have done before, right? It's a tremendous story that's still in play. And obviously you have the go-lives coming up right at the end of this month, the first one. So firstly, best of luck with the first set of go-lives. I know there's a tremendous amount of hard work that's gone into that. Would love to have you back for one of these discussions in, say, 12 to 18 months and see how things are going.
Yeah, that would be
and
great.
then we'll stay in touch. But thank you very, very much, Jim, for your time this morning. Thank you.